Hi, and welcome to another Brightspace Competencies tutorial. In this video, we're going to look at a little more advanced way to add release conditions. I'm going to show you more of maybe a real-world example of how I would have used release conditions in my class before. I had something a little more complicated where in order to access the next module, I did an option where they could either take the final quiz or submit a studio project and written reflection to end that module. So with the students being able to do either or, it kind of made the release conditions a little trickier for me to set up. But I think I can demonstrate, but I'm going to demonstrate for you how to do that to where it made sense, and hopefully by seeing how I used it, maybe that'll give you some ideas. So I just want to go here and show you my competency structure real quick. Here are my end of module assessments, and then under each they get the final quiz or studio project objective. And then if I look at the structure, I have the final quiz and the Dropbox. Now, what's tricky is it would be a little easier if both were needed to complete the module and earn that objective and then the outlying competency. But I'm giving them the option because I couldn't really make studio projects mandatory because of some students not having access to certain materials like they would in a classroom. But I would just wanted to provide that option if it would help certain students, or they would enjoy that, or they would be able to do it. And then we had different ways of working around material issues, but we're not going to get into all that. I just want to show you a scenario where release conditions can get a little more complicated. So we have our final project option here. So this would be the studio Dropbox, and I have a student assessed right now as a level 3, so they met the threshold, so they have a complete status. And I'm waiting to assess these two students to show you again how the release condition would work. And then if we look at the structure again, we can see the final quiz here too, the results on that. So we'll see that students 1 and 3 completed the final quiz with a score that meets or that surpasses the threshold, so they got a completion status, but student 2 did not. So let's just keep that in mind when we're meeting these release conditions. That 1 and 3 passed the quiz, student 2 did not. And then so far on the project, we have student 1 completing the project, and then student 2 and 3 have not been assessed yet. And then also keep in mind for my course that the students wouldn't need to complete both activities, but I was just going here and trying some things out. So let's go back to content real quick. Okay, so I'm going to set up the release condition on Module 2 because I want Module 2 to open when students either pass the quiz or pass the Dropbox activity. They can do either one. So I'm going to show you what I have to do to make that work. Right now I'm going to log in as the sample student to show you that right now they should have access to Module 2. So I should be able to pick any one of those sample students. This happens to be the Navi one. And you can see they have access to Module 1 and to Module 2. So there's no release condition on it yet, so they should have access to everything. So now if I log back in as the teacher, I'm going to set that release condition. And then we'll watch what happens. Okay, so I go to the place I want to release when a certain action has taken place. So I'm setting the release condition on Module 2, which will be set to release when students complete the desired activities. So I go to Add Dates and Restrictions. I'm going to create a release condition. And since we're dealing with competencies, I'm going to choose these. So I'm going to choose that the learning objective was achieved and I'm going to select the learning objective that was associated with the quiz and final project, the ethnographic final quiz or studio project, and I'll say create. So when this learning objective is achieved, this module should open up. And then I'm going to add an additional one on there. If I go down to competencies, and then I can put, I'm going to do score and associated rubric. And then if I select that same objective, and then I select my studio project rubric, I can say overall rubric score again and set the threshold level to level 3. That should cover if the student is assessed on the studio project and receives a score above level 3, they should also get module 2 released. So we have those two in place. So I'll say update, and I'm going to create one more. Now. What I did before was I went to and did one on quizzes too, so I could get the score on the quiz and set that to my arts final, and then I set it to, it had to be greater or equal to 70%. So we have a choice. We can either set this to any or all conditions must be met. So I'm going to say any, because whether they complete this objective or they if they turn in the studio project and they pass the studio project, module 2 will open, so they don't have to complete the quiz and the project. They can do either one. And then by doing either of these things, they would also achieve the learning objective here. So we'll say update, and then everything will be covered. So now if I log out as teacher and log back in as a sample student, now if we recall here, student 1 did pass the quiz. So we should see that module 2 has opened up for this sample student. Okay, so we see that student 1 did pass the quiz with a score that exceeded the threshold. So we see that module 2 has opened up. But if we log in as student 2 and we go to their content, we'll see module 2 should not open up because they did not pass that quiz, that final quiz, and they did not get assessed on the studio project option yet. So we see only 1 is open, weeks 1, 2, and 3, and module 2 has not opened up yet. This is stuff from a different playground situation that I'm not working with. But module 2 has not opened up. So now if I log back in as teacher, and let's go ahead and assess student 2 and 3 on the Dropbox item. So if I go to my Dropbox and I go to that final student project, let's see, final Ethno Art final project option. So if I go to view submissions, now if I go to student 2 and say they decided instead of taking the quiz again, they would now do the studio project option. And I go ahead and I look at their work, and the student actually did a very outstanding job on these Native American projects. So, so if we go ahead and assess this with a score that meets the threshold for the final project, which includes a studio portion and a written reflection, they had to answer questions and reflect upon their work to show competency for that module. Now I'll just say save and record. So we can see that the student, we gave them 100% credit. They achieved level 4, so that more than meets the threshold, and we'll say update. So now if we go back to folder, and we go up to our competency structure, I just want to show you again. If we go to the end of module assessments and then the final for the first module, ethnographic arts, and we click on our structure, we can check the results for this studio project option, and we'll recall that student 1 I already had assessed at level 3, and then student 2 now has achieved completed status for this final assessment activity. Let's recall also that this Navigator 2 did not pass the final quiz. So if we go down to in our competency structure and check the end of module assessments under the ethnographic art final, we see our final project option. They did achieve that activity but did not achieve the quiz. So I'm going to log back in as student 2 now, and we should see, since they met the project option and we have that release condition set up to where they can meet any of those criteria, since he did meet one of those criteria, passing the studio project option, that module 2 will now open up for that student. So let me log in. Okay, so I'm logged in as student 2 now. I'm going to go to my course, go to content, and module 2 should be open now for this student. And as you can see, module 2 is open, so our release condition worked as it should. In my class before, I like to set it up so if the student either passed the quiz with the 70% or above, or once they submitted to a Dropbox, module 2 would open. So, but now that we're using competencies, I could set that up to, so they have to achieve a certain score on the rubric associated with my competency structure, and I think that actually is probably a little more effective. So I hope you found this helpful, learning maybe a little bit more about release conditions and the options you have for competencies, and thank you for watching.